Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Do you remember when the internet first, burst onto the scene? It really felt like this ultimate frontier for free expression, right?
Absolutely, like a truly open global town square. That was the promise.
Exactly. Where every voice could potentially be heard and ideas could just flow freely, no borders. Well, today, that grand vision, it's looking a little, well, complicated, wouldn't you say?
Complicated is putting it mildly.
The ideal of absolute free speech, something so fundamental to many democracies, it's just clashing hard with the commercial interests, the political realities that kind of dominate the digital platforms we use every single day. And this isn't just some minor technical glitch, right? It feels like a fundamental paradox at the heart of our online lives now.
It really is.
So today, we're embarking on a deep dive into this incredibly complex world where free speech meets social media, basically. We're going to explore the legal battlegrounds, where these core principles are actually being fought out. We'll try to uncover some of the surprising and often pretty subtle ways our online speech is now being controlled.
Which people often don't even realize is happening.
Exactly. And crucially, we need to dissect why so many of us feel mainstream platforms are consistently falling short. Falling short in upholding that original promise of open discourse.
Yeah.
You might find some of the stuff we uncover today really reframes how you think about your daily clicks and scrolls.
And what's truly insightful here, I think, is that the very architecture of these platforms, it's often driven by these really intricate business models, right?
Right, the need to make money.
The relentless pursuit of profit, yeah. And all sorts of external pressures, governmental, commercial. This structure itself creates an inherent tension, a fundamental conflict, really, with that idea of the unfettered exchange of ideas we initially envisioned for the internet.
So it's baked into the system, almost.
It seems that way. It's not simply a matter of good intentions gone wrong. It feels more like a structural challenge. And that demands we look beyond the surface, beyond the simple like or share buttons. We need to really understand the underlying mechanisms that are shaping or maybe even distorting our online voices.
And here's the exciting part, or at least the hopeful part. We're not just here to point out all the problems. Our mission today goes beyond just critique. We're also going to explore a new way forward. A compelling vision, really, for a truly community-driven internet, where your voice, your content, your community, they're genuinely and unequivocally your own.
Which sounds pretty revolutionary compared to where we are now.
It does, and we'll be looking specifically at how Web 4 technology, and specifically Linkspreed's Web 4 Lite, offers what many are seeing as the ultimate solution. The solution to these growing challenges, paving the way for a truly free and autonomous online experience.
A potential path out of the current mess.
Exactly. Okay, so let's kick things off by examining what's often considered the bedrock of free speech, at least in the U.S., the First Amendment. And then let's see how its principles actually play out, or maybe don't play out, in our digital lives.
Right, because there's a common misconception there.
There really is. What many find surprising, maybe even a bit jarring, is how that foundational protection actually works online. While the First Amendment famously protects freedom of speech, its primary job is to shield us from government censorship.
Key distinction.
To government.
Yes. It's a safeguard against the state telling us what we can or cannot say. But social media platforms, for all their public square feel and their massive reach, they are fundamentally private businesses.
Like any other shop or service, legally speaking, in that sense.
Which means, as an individual user, you generally can't directly use the First Amendment to fight back against content moderation you disagree with or what you perceive as censorship on a private platform like Facebook or Twitter.
That private entity status is crucial. It is, and this critical distinction shapes so much of the current debate. And it often leaves users feeling, well, pretty powerless, frankly.
Yeah, and stepping back to see the broader implications, states have certainly recognized this gap, this protection gap, and they've tried to intervene.
We saw that in Texas and Florida, right?
Exactly. We saw laws passed there in 2021, for example. And these laws weren't shy about their intent either. They directly aimed to prevent large platforms from censoring third-party content.
Trying to force them to be more like open forums.
That was the idea. Proponents specifically argued that platforms have unfairly censored and shadow banned users, particularly, they claimed, in response to bias against conservative speech.
So SB 7072 in Florida and HB 20 in Texas.
Correct. Those were direct legislative responses to these concerns. They sought to enforce what they saw as the ideals of free speech by regulating platform content moderation policies, essentially trying to treat these private platforms more like common carriers or public utilities,
Yeah.
mandating openness.
Which the platforms obviously push back against.
Oh, absolutely. And as you can imagine, this led to a really fascinating legal showdown because these state regulations themselves were then challenged, raising this incredibly complex question. Do these state laws infringe upon the platform's own First Amendment rights?
Their right to moderate, to choose what speech they host, like an editor.
Precisely. Their right to control their speech through their moderation decisions. This whole tangled mess eventually reached the highest court in the land. As the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in Moody v. NetChoice and NetChoice v. Paxton just this year, February 26, 2024.
A major case for the future of the internet.
Definitely. So the critical question becomes, who truly owns the digital public square, and whose speech rights win out when platforms make content decisions? Is it the individual user expecting an open forum? Is it the state trying to regulate that forum for fairness? Or is it the private platform itself asserting its own editorial control? It's a massive legal knot, really difficult to untangle, with huge implications for how we communicate online going forward. And another really compelling aspect of this whole debate is that these free speech discussions and the pressures on online expression, they are absolutely not confined to the U.S.
Oh, yeah, it's a global thing.
It's truly global. Article 19, which is a prominent global organization defending freedom of expression, they highlight a deeply worrying worldwide trend. Their global expression report, it indicates that, and I quote, hard-won gains in our rights are slipping away.
Slipping away.
Yeah. And this erosion, they find, is often undermined by the actions of populist leaders across various nations. It's a pattern we see repeating in different political and cultural contexts, suggesting a really systemic challenge to digital liberties everywhere.
That's a crucial point, that global dimension, because we've seen concrete instances of social media being throttled or even outright threatened internationally. For example, Turkey has faced repeated calls, to stop throttling social media and messaging services, basically limiting access for its citizens, often during politically sensitive times like protests or crises.
Common tactic, unfortunately.
It seems to be. And in Malaysia, there was a big public push to protect political speech and to reverse a government decision against Telegram, which is a widely used messaging app popular for encrypted communication.
Governments don't always like that encryption.
No, they don't. And even China's legislature is currently reviewing a draft cybersecurity law. That could have really profound global implications for online freedom, potentially setting precedents that reach far beyond its own borders.
Definitely one to watch.
It just demonstrates how governments globally can exert significant pressure, sometimes directly through laws, sometimes indirectly, on these mainstream social media platforms.
Creating a very unstable environment.
Exactly. An unstable and unpredictable environment for truly free expression, making these platforms less reliable as genuine forums for global discourse than maybe we once thought.
And beyond that direct legislation or the overt throttling we just talked about, there's a more subtle, but I'd argue equally powerful form of influence at play. It's government jawboning.
Jawboning, right. Explain that a bit more.
Sure. It's basically when government officials pressure platforms to take down content or change their moderation decisions, but often without any formal legal orders, without a clear statutory basis.
So it's like informal pressure, a quiet word.
Exactly. It's a form of soft power that can be incredibly effective precisely because it lacks the transparency of formal legal processes. It operates more in the shadows, making it really difficult to trace and challenge. Yet its impact on the content you see or don't see can be just as profound as direct censorship.
And to understand the full scope of this, we've seen accusations that this jawboning really threatens to become, quote, an extra-constitutional method of speech regulation.
Strong words.
They are. Take the Biden administration, for instance. It was accused of pressuring Twitter back in 2021 to remove Alex Berenson, who was a skeptic of COVID vaccines and lockdown policies, from the platform.
And proving that direct causation is hard, but the pattern.
The pattern of communication, the timing, the outcomes, it suggests a clear influence, even without a smoking gun memo saying remove him. And even more explicitly in a case called Murthy v. Missouri. A U.S. district court judge actually found that White House officials and various federal agencies had potentially violated the First Amendment.
How so?
By, in the judge's view, coercing or significantly encouraging platforms' content moderation decisions, specifically regarding alleged falsehoods about the pandemic and the 2020 election.
Wow. So the court saw evidence of crossing that line from persuasion to coercion.
It suggests a systemic pattern, potentially, where government entities aren't just informing platforms, but actively influencing their behavior, blurring those lines between simply providing information and actually pressuring for specific outcomes.
And it's not just about these broad public health issues either. Political groups also frequently face this kind of pressure.
Right, like the NRA example.
Exactly. The NRA alleged that a state official in New York, actually, used her regulatory authority over financial institutions to pressure them into blacklisting the organization, specifically because of its political speech, its advocacy.
Leveraging financial regulation for political ends, essentially?
That was the allegation. And the Supreme Court agreed to hear this case, which really highlights the significant free speech concerns. When state power is potentially leveraged against an organization's expressive activities just because officials disagree with their message.
So the critical question, again, it becomes, when does that persuasion cross the line into actual coercion?
It's a very fine line and a dangerous one.
These incidents just highlight how easily mainstream platforms can become instruments of indirect censorship, compromising their perceived role as neutral forums for the exchange of ideas.
And instead becoming tools wielded by external forces, whether governmental or commercial.
Which just erodes public trust, right? And fundamentally undermines that whole promise of an open internet.
Absolutely. It makes you question the whole setup.
Okay, so let's pivot now. Let's examine why these mainstream platforms seem to fundamentally fall short in fostering truly free speech for you and your communities. This is where things get really compelling, I think. Many critics argue pretty forcefully that the commercial internet has failed.
Failed its users, failed its promise.
Yeah, calling it a self-inflicted wound driven primarily by, well, relentless greed. This process has even been given a name, quite a evocative one, the enshittification of Web 2.
Ah, yeah, coined by Cory Doctorow. It's catchy because it feels true to many people's experience.
It does. It describes how mainstream actors, over time, deliberately add more friction and dark user patterns, all in the name of profitability. So the user experience, and by extension, free expression, it just becomes secondary to the bottom line.
Degrading the entire online ecosystem in the process. And what's truly insightful about this idea of enshittification isn't just that platforms get worse over time for profit, that's part of it, but it's that this degradation fundamentally redefines free expression itself.
How do you mean?
Well, when your voice is just another data point to be collected and monetized, or your content, the stuff you create, is deliberately demoted or hidden to make way for paid ads. The very meaning of speaking freely online gets corrupted, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's not just about sharing ideas anymore.
Exactly. It's no longer purely about communication. It's about commerce. It's about capturing your attention, capturing your data, all for profit. Companies like Google, the world's biggest ad company, they are continuously trying to track users for advertising.
We all know that feeling.
Right. And this doesn't just invade your privacy, which is bad enough. It actively hinders tools like ad blockers. Tools which the FBI surprisingly recommends as an essential anti-malware tool.
The FBI recommends ad blockers. That's interesting.
It is. It shows how intertwined tracking is with potential security risks now. But the point is, this business model, by its very nature, inherently prioritizes data collection and ad revenue over the user's experience or the integrity of truly open expression.
It's a fundamental conflict of interest, then.
Totally. And you, the user, you're often the product being sold, not the actual customer.
And the concerns just deepen when we look at future revenue streams like AI. There's this growing worry that as artificial intelligence becomes a major new way to make money, big tech owners, think Meta, think X, for example, they may end up caring much less about whether content on their platforms is linked to violence or negatively affects mental health, especially for kids, or even if it amplifies the promotion of fascist or extreme right-wing political views.
Because the focus shifts to monetizing the AI, not policing the content.
That's the fear. The focus shifts even more acutely to what generates profit through AI integration, rather than the societal impact of the content being amplified or the health of the online discourse.
It feels like a declining sense of responsibility, almost an abdication, really.
Yeah, in the pursuit of the next big revenue stream.
And this really raises an important question, doesn't it? Is this whole free speech versus censorship debate we constantly hear about? Is it truly about a principled stance on expression? Or is it often a calculated strategy to advance political agendas and profit?
Using free speech as a shield or a weapon, depending on the goal.
Perhaps. When the pursuit of power and profit seems to be privileged over fundamental principles of open discourse. The trust we place in democratic institutions and in the platforms meant to facilitate that discourse, it can erode significantly.
And that dynamic fundamentally undermines the very freedoms these platforms often claim to defend.
Exactly. It renders them pretty unreliable arbiters of public conversation, unfortunately.
Okay, another huge problem, and one that affects your daily experience directly, lies in algorithmic control. This often creates just an illusion of choice.
The invisible hand shaping your feed.
Totally. Mainstream social media platforms rely so heavily on complex algorithms to curate our feeds, silently deciding what content you see, what posts get visibility, and what remains hidden. Now, algorithms themselves aren't inherently bad, right? They can be useful for filtering, for organizing information.
Sure, for finding relevant stuff.
But the core problem lies in the lack of control that you, the user, have over them. These systems are typically designed not for your well-being, not for a balanced information diet.
But for maximizing engagement, keeping your eyeballs glued.
Exactly, which unfortunately often means amplifying misinformation or extreme content, because that stuff tends to generate more clicks, more shares, more reactions. It's provocative.
So we end up in these digital echo chambers, often without realizing it.
Yeah, echo chambers we don't fully understand or control.
And, to understand the full scope of this, there are attempts to regulate this, but they often fall short of really empowering the user.
Like the DSA in Europe.
Right, the EU's Digital Services Act, or the DSA. And in the U.S., there's the proposed Filter Bubble Transparency Act. The DSA, for example, it requires platforms to disclose the main parameters used in their recommender systems, and it mandates at least one option for a content stream, not based on profiling.
Okay, that sounds like a step.
It is a step, but even with those measures, it doesn't fundamentally stop algorithms from amplifying harmful or extreme content if that content drives engagement.
It doesn't fix the core incentive.
Not entirely. Similarly, the Filter Bubble Transparency Act in the U.S., it would allow users to switch between the platform's usual opaque algorithm and an input transparent one where you see why something was recommended. But crucially, it doesn't offer a non-algorithmic, purely chronological feed option.
So you still can't just see everything from people you follow in order.
Not necessarily mandated by that act. As one tech editor, Adi Robertson, pointed out, nothing stops companies from delivering inflammatory content that encourages negative engagement, even with these laws.
So there are attempts, but maybe not hitting the root cause.
They don't fully empower the user to truly reclaim their feed from algorithmic influence.
And the Supreme Court itself wrestled with this very issue in that Moody case we mentioned. The really eye-opening insight from the arguments there is this. If algorithms are indeed a platform speech, as Justice Kagan and some other justices suggested they might be,
meaning the platform is speaking through the content it chooses to show you.
Exactly. Then the very act of seeing information online is no longer a neutral interaction. It becomes a curated editorial experience shaped by the platform.
Which completely flips the script on that whole public square idea, doesn't it?
Totally. It suggests platforms are much more like private editors actively shaping public discourse
than just neutral conduits passing along messages.
And it effectively means that the platform's voice through its algorithm might overshadow or even manipulate your own ability to access information and express yourself freely.
So the critical question that emerges is, if platforms' algorithms are considered their speech, their editorial choice, what does that mean for your right, the individual user's right, to control what information you consume and share?
Where does the user's autonomy fit in?
Precisely. It's fundamentally about curtailing platform power, as some argue, giving users more genuine agency over their digital experience. Because without that agency, without the ability to opt out or genuinely understand these powerful content shapers, the promise of free speech becomes deeply compromised by these invisible curatorial hands.
Hands guided by commercial interests, not necessarily community well-being or truth.
Exactly.
Okay, beyond the algorithms, let's talk about the actual process of content moderation. On mainstream platforms, it is, frankly, incredibly murky. It seems plagued by secrecy, potential bias, and just plain human error.
All of which directly impacts your ability to speak freely and know the rules of the road.
Right. The problem starts with these opaque rules. Mainstream platforms are notoriously secretive, not just about what content is banned, but how those rules are actually enforced day to day.
The internal guidelines, the moderator instructions.
Yeah, most of that is hidden, and this lack of clarity is a real double-edged sword. If Bad guys know precisely what words, phrases, and images to avoid, as the source material puts it. They can easily evade detection.
While legitimate users often find themselves completely in the dark about why their post got removed.
Exactly, with little to no real recourse or clear explanation.
And digging a bit deeper, we find the sheer, just overwhelming volume of content these platforms have to process. It's mind-boggling.
Billions of posts, images, videos.
Right. Moderators, who are often low-paid workers in places like Bangladesh and the Philippines, they're tasked with reviewing thousands of items daily under immense pressure.
That sounds incredibly stressful and difficult.
It is. And even a tiny error rate, let's say 0.00001%, which sounds minuscule. When you apply that to almost a billion items of content every week, which is the kind of scale we're talking about, that results in hundreds of thousands of mistakes every week.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yes. And these errors aren't just theoretical numbers. They can stem from genuine human mistakes under pressure, or perpetrators being especially sneaky in their evasion tactics, or simply policies being open to subjective interpretation in the heat of the moment.
Can you give an example?
Sure. There was a stark example cited from Indonesia. An organization campaigning against violence had its anti-violence education material, which was live streamed to YouTube, taken down, mistakenly flagged. Meanwhile, an opposing organization's posts using clever misspellings like V10L3NC3, that's violence with numbers, or K3T3R454N in Indonesian, those posts were made up, presumably slipping past the algorithmic detection because of the obfuscated spelling.
Wow. So the good guys get taken down, the bad guys stay up because they game the system.
That's the kind of inconsistency that breeds deep frustration and a sense of arbitrary injustice for users just trying to express themselves legitimately.
But the challenges of content moderation aren't just technical or about scale, are they? They often spiral into deeply contested territory when political motivations inevitably enter the picture.
Yeah, that's unavoidable, it seems.
Content decisions on mainstream platforms aren't always neutral. They can be influenced by external pressures or internal biases. The Twitter files, for instance, regardless of what you think of them, they revealed anguished discussions among executives about the decision to ban former President Trump.
It wasn't a simple rule violation decision.
Apparently not. One executive was quoted noting that the narrative that Trump and his friends have pursued must be taken into account, which ultimately contributed to his ban after the January 6th Capitol riot. This clearly shows how political considerations or perceived political context can override what might otherwise be purely content-based decisions.
Blurring the lines again.
And the very definition of shadow banning itself is contested. Elon Musk, when he took over Twitter X, defined it as using algorithms to de-amplify tweets, make them less visible. But old Twitter, before him, defined it more narrowly as deliberately making someone's content undiscoverable to everyone except the person who posted it.
So even the term means different things to different people.
Exactly. This ambiguity and these shifting definitions only serve to fuel accusations and distrust, leaving users wondering if their voice is truly being heard or if it's being silently suppressed for reasons they don't understand.
And despite all these issues, despite continuous calls for transparency reports, those documents that ideally show how companies respond to government data requests and how they enforce their own policies.
We hear calls for those all the time.
We do. But these reports are often difficult to locate, even when they exist. And companies frequently resist providing detailed information, often citing competitive advantage.
Protecting their secret sauce, even if it affects users' rights.
It seems that way. So this raises a really important question. How can you, as a user, trust a system whose rules are unclear, whose enforcement is inconsistent, and whose decision-making processes are shrouded in secrecy?
It's hard.
It is. This pervasive lack of platform accountability has plagued social media in the past. Remember, Facebook's repeated failures to fully remove discriminatory housing or job ads, even after they claimed they had systems in place.
Yeah, those stories kept coming up.
The problem persists because the mechanisms for genuine oversight and redress for users are often weak or insufficient, leaving free speech vulnerable to arbitrary corporate decisions, biases, and errors.
So let's zoom out. What does all this truly mean for our societies, for civic engagement? Mainstream social media, it seems, far from fostering democratic ideals or facilitating healthy debate, has arguably become a breeding ground for political polarization.
It often feels that way, doesn't it?
Think about your own feed. How often do you see genuine, nuanced debate versus just Starkfest versus their rhetoric, or framing everything as the pure people versus the corrupt elite?
Very black and white thinking.
Exactly. These platforms seem almost designed sometimes to strip away nuance, leaving very little room for consensus or compromise. And this constant framing of issues in stark adversarial terms, it directly contributes to the breakdown of civil discourse that we see all around us.
And another compelling aspect here, backed by research, is that studies show platforms like Twitter are heavily influenced by social media bots, botnets.
Automated accounts spreading messages.
Right, and these bots actively manipulate narratives. They spread homogeneity, making certain viewpoints seem more popular than they are, rather than reflecting genuine diversity of opinion. These bots are literally designed to sway opinions. They spread what researchers call computational propaganda and floods of fake tweets.
And the insidious part's how accessible this is, right?
Absolutely. Bots can be purchased very cheaply online, making them a critical and affordable tool for anyone wanting to influence political movements, manipulate trending topics, inflate engagement metrics. It ultimately makes the authenticity and trustworthiness of information incredibly hard to discern for the average user.
You don't know if you're arguing with a person or a script.
Precisely. It's a constant battle against engineered deception.
And this leads to, potentially, a dangerous erosion of critical thinking skills, especially among younger demographics.
Who grew up with these platforms as their main source of information.
Exactly. Many people, particularly millennials and Gen Z, increasingly get their news through social media platforms, often from friends, family, and influencers they already follow and trust. Not necessarily vetted news sources.
Yeah, creates a vulnerability.
It does. It makes them less likely to do due diligence in questioning the authenticity of messages they encounter. The source feels trusted, so the message is accepted more readily. And the sheer number of followers or likes on a particular message, that can often convince individuals to subscribe to false beliefs.
Even if those ideas run contrary to their own values or just common sense, social proof is powerful.
It's a testament to the power of that perceived social proof over factual accuracy in these environments.
And this raises a really fundamental question for our democracy. When the sheer number of followers can sway belief, and traditional news media have arguably lost some of their role as the primary gatekeepers of truth.
How do we maintain sensible dialogues? How do we promote democratic principles based on informed consent?
It's a huge challenge. The current mainstream model seems to be failing to bridge these gaps. Instead, as we've discussed, it often fosters divisive narratives that attack opponents and blame perceived elites.
Rather than encouraging constructive engagement, finding common ground, or even just a willingness to seek out disconfirming information.
The very foundation of participatory democracy, which relies on informed citizens engaging in good faith, feels like it's under siege when the digital spaces meant to facilitate discourse instead seem to undermine it.
A pretty bleak picture of the status quo. Okay, given all those challenges, all those fundamental failures of mainstream social media to truly foster free speech and healthy discourse, it's clear we need a fundamental shift, right, in how we approach online interaction.
Something has to change.
And that brings us to the promise of true communities and why self-ownership is absolutely key to unlocking that promise. Okay, let's unpack this. The word community gets thrown around a lot online.
Overused, maybe.
Maybe. But a TikTok following or a YouTube livestream audience, despite potentially huge numbers, they aren't really online communities in the deepest sense, are they?
Not typically, no. Those are often more about the voice of one person, the creator. It creates a very top-down engagement model. Interactions primarily between the audience and the central host or creator, rather than a rich, interconnected web of relationships among the members themselves. What's truly defining here for a true online community is that it's characterized by being a group of members brought together in an online space by the shared desire to belong.
Belonging, that's key.
It is, and it thrives on member-led growth, where super members, the really engaged folks, actively contribute, foster content, answer questions. And crucially, there's a real network of social connections between members, not just funneling up to a host.
People talking to each other, supporting each other.
Exactly. And unlike mainstream social media, which often relies on those algorithmic dopamine hits to keep users hooked, a true community, as one source put it, is an apple pie, not cocaine.
I like that analogy.
It fosters genuine connection and belonging, a slower, more nourishing kind of engagement, rather than addiction or fleeting clicks. And many of these true communities are actually closed. They might require approval or even payment to join.
Which gives more control.
Far more control over membership. It creates a self-contained, often more intimate ecosystem where people feel safer, more invested, and the signal-to-noise ratio is much better.
And this distinct nature of true communities, it's absolutely critical to understanding how we can build better spaces. Better spaces for free expression, for meaningful interaction online. It's about designing for genuine connection, for shared purpose, for actual ownership, not just for passive consumption or playing the algorithm game.
It really is a fundamental paradigm shift from the mainstream model.
So how do you actually get to build these kinds of spaces? Where does the power come from? This is where things get truly compelling, I think. If you've ever connected a group of friends, maybe for a book club, maybe organizing a local sports team, or even just created a space for work colleagues to collaborate and chat, you're already a community builder.
Most people have done this in some form offline or online.
Exactly. That fundamental human instinct to bring people together for a shared purpose, to foster connection, it's universal. Now imagine applying that same instinct to create and cultivate your own online social space, one that's tailored precisely to your needs, your group's values, the unique culture you want to build.
Instead of being sourced into the generic, one-size-fits-all mold of a giant platform. And to understand the full scope of this, the power it gives you, building your own community platform grants you complete control over its design, its features, the content shared within it, and precisely who gets to access it.
You're the architect.
You are. And crucially, you retain control over your data, which is a monumental shift from mainstream platforms that track and monetize your every click, your every interaction.
Privacy becomes a real possibility.
Yes. This allows for vital privacy protections. Things like robust GDPR compliance, for example. If your platform is hosted in the EU or Germany, becomes straightforward because you control the data. And this contrasts so sharply with mainstream platforms, right?
Wow.
Where a vague complaint, maybe from someone malicious, can lead to your entire group just disappearing overnight.
With no explanation, no appeal.
Exactly. No real recourse. But as a paying customer on a white label platform or running your own self-hosted one, you can reasonably expect someone to answer the phone when you call with problems. However, unlike the often frustrating anonymous brick wall experience of trying to get support from Facebook or other giant impersonal corporations.
And even for businesses or organizations, actively trying to build strong communities around their brand or cause, relying on those free platforms like Facebook groups or Discord often falls incredibly short.
They hit limitations pretty quickly.
They do. These platforms are simply not made for organizations that need control, monetization, and legal security. They leave you completely dependent on Facebook or whatever the parent company is, meaning your community's existence is always at their whim, subject to their policy changes, their algorithm tweaks, their commercial priorities.
You're building on rented land.
Totally. They also offer no real SEO benefits for all the valuable user-generated content shared within your group. So all that wisdom, all those discussions remain hidden from the wider web, siloed off.
They provide only limited, often pretty unsatisfactory data analysis,
hindering your ability to truly understand your members, see what's working, and nurture the community effectively.
You're flying blind in many ways, without genuine ownership or long-term security.
Yeah.
And this raises an important question. What happens when you do build your own platform? You empower your users in a really profound way. You make them feel like they are truly part of something, a wider community that can genuinely influence your brand, your direction, your cause.
They become stakeholders, not just users.
Exactly. This investment of time and energy from members, when they feel heard and valued, it creates customers for life, potentially. But more importantly, it fosters authentic engagement and a deep sense of belonging. That simply isn't possible on platforms designed primarily for maximizing advertising revenue and superficial interactions.
It's a shift from being a fleeting user to being a deeply invested member, building shared value and trust together. And when you own your digital space, you also get to dictate the culture in a much more intentional way. Rules in a community, they aren't just about restriction, about telling people what they can't do.
It shouldn't be, ideally.
Right. Their real purpose is to establish and nurture social norms which create a powerful community experience. This is how you deliberately shape the culture of your digital space, ensuring it aligns with your vision, your values, rather than just conforming to some generic corporate standard imposed from the outside.
You set the tone, and your members help maintain it because they buy into it. And what's truly fascinating here is seeing how different communities thrive with very different rules. It demonstrates the power of tailored cultural design. Take Stack Overflow, for example, the community for programmers. It's known for being notoriously stringent.
Yeah, you have to ask questions just right there.
Exactly. It prioritizes high-quality facts over opinions, over chat, which leads to it being a highly efficient resource for getting answers to technical problems. But it also creates a more exclusive, less welcoming, less chatty feel. If you don't follow the strict format, your question is likely to be closed or downvoted quickly.
Very focused, but maybe intimidating.
Right. On the other hand, look at Sephora's beauty community, which was highlighted as a client of Feverbee, a community consultancy. Their approach invites you to start a conversation. It fosters a much more inclusive, chatty, and less formal environment. Perfect for sharing beauty tips, asking for advice, building rapport.
Completely different vibe, serving a different purpose.
Exactly. These distinct approaches show that rules are not one size fits all. They are custom-crafted tools for building a specific kind of culture.
And these examples just powerfully illustrate that. With full control, with ownership, you can deliberately design a community that reflects your specific values, that promotes the kind of interaction and, yes, the kind of free expression you want to cultivate, rather than being subjected to a one-size-fits-all corporate policy that might not fit at all.
It's about intentionality and design.
You get to decide what kind of conversations thrive, what kind of content is valued, what kind of environment best serves your community's unique purpose and definition of productive speech.
Indeed. And moderation, then, when done thoughtfully within that own space, it becomes fundamentally about creating the right kind of community culture. By actively encouraging the good and removing the bad, according to the norms you've established with your community.
Not just reacting to flags based on opaque global rules.
Precisely. This means establishing those social norms early, communicating them clearly, and enforcing them consistently and transparently, not arbitrarily or secretly. And the key takeaway here is really profound. The control gained by owning your platform allows for this nuanced, culture-first approach to moderation, ensuring that free speech is defined and nurtured by the community itself based on its shared values.
Rather than being dictated by those external commercial pressures or political forces we talked about earlier.
It truly reclaims the digital public square for its actual users, its members, making it a space where genuine expression, as defined by that community, can actually flourish.
Okay, so what does this all mean for the future? Where do we go from here? The problems we've spent time discussing with mainstream social media, the relentless profit motive, the insidious algorithmic control, the opaque moderation, the hijacking of civic discourse, all of this highlights a fundamental, really urgent need for change, doesn't it?
Something radically different seems necessary.
And that's precisely where Web 4 comes into the picture. It's positioned not just as another incremental update like Web 2.0 or Web 3, but as a direct reaction to the enshittification of Web 2.
A conscious attempt to fix what went wrong.
Exactly. To fix how Web 2 has repeatedly prioritized corporate profit over user experience, over genuine community, leaving free speech increasingly vulnerable and compromised in the process.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is that Web 4 suggests a pretty profound shift in perspective. It argues that some parts of the internet should be considered public infrastructure.
Like roads or water systems or the power grid.
Kind of like that, yeah. Essential services that shouldn't necessarily be purely profit-driven or controlled by single entities. And the vision for social media within this Web 4 framework is clear and compelling. Quote, "You do not need brands cluttering your social media feed."
Hallelujah to that.
Right. It champions moving beyond what's called edge-dominant software. That's the current model where all the power, all the data, and crucially, all the profits are concentrated at the edge with the platform owner, disproportionately benefiting them, often at the direct expense of the users who create the value.
So Web 4 wants to push power back to the users.
Back towards the center, the users themselves and their communities. It's a complete reevaluation of how digital spaces should be designed, governed, and owned.
Now, it's probably important here to distinguish Web 4 from Web 3. We hear a lot about Web 3, too.
Yeah, there's often confusion there.
According to the sources we looked at, Web 3 was largely misguided. The idea was often to run everything on a blockchain for transparency and verifiability.
Which sounds good in theory.
But in practice, it often consisted of enthusiastic developers applying blockchain unnecessarily, often in really complex and inefficient ways. And unfortunately, the Web3 space also became riddled with greedy, dishonest actors who seemed more focused on speculative crypto games over building genuine utility.
A lot of hype, not always a lot of substance or user-friendliness.
Right. Web 4 seems to be taking a different path, a more practical, more community-focused approach. Learning from those missteps, perhaps, and prioritizing genuine user and community empowerment through accessible, functional technology.
Not just through novel and often complex blockchain applications for everything, more focused on self-hosting and federation.
And at the forefront of this Web 4 movement, offering a concrete and actually incredibly accessible way forward, is Linkspreed. This is where things get truly compelling and practical for listeners. Linkspreed is spearheading this charge with their Web 4 social networks as a service, and maybe even more excitingly, with Web 4 Lite, which is an open source solution that's essentially described as a Facebook clone at home.
Meaning you can run your own Facebook-like network yourself.
Exactly. Imagine having the full functionality of a major social network: posts, groups, friends, photos, interactions, all of it. But it's one that you own and control completely, run on your own hardware, not some distant tech giant.
And to understand the full scope of this, the core promise of Web 4 Lite is to provide a fully functional, self-hosted social network, one that is accessible from anywhere in the world, secure with HTTPS, and completely under your control.
Okay, self-hosted might sound technically daunting to some people.
And that's the revolutionary part. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
What makes this truly accessible, potentially for anyone, regardless of their deep technical background, is the way Linkspreed demonstrates it can be done. For instance, their guides show how even a compact, affordable device like a Raspberry Pi—
those little credit card-sized computers.
Exactly. That can become your personal server, hosting your entire social network for your family, friends, or community. And by cleverly integrating free or low-cost services like Cloudflare Tunnel, you get global access for your users with top-tier security— that's the HTTPS part, ensuring encrypted connections. And crucially, you do this without needing a vulnerable, static public IP address at home.
Which protects your home network from direct attacks.
Precisely. This ingenious setup means you can host your community from your home, securely, protected from direct online threats. And it ensures that powerful, custom social media is genuinely accessible to almost anyone, not just corporations with huge server farms.
It really democratizes the ability to create and own your own online social spaces. And this isn't just about the technology, cool as it is. It's about shifting the fundamental power dynamics of the internet squarely back into your hands, the user's hands.
It's a political statement, almost as much as a technical one.
I think so. With Linkspreed and this Web 4 approach, you're not merely renting space in someone else's digital city anymore, subject to their landlord's ever-changing rules, their surveillance, their whims. You're actively building your own digital home, your own town square, designing it from the ground up to serve your community's unique needs and values.
It's a return to true autonomy, true self-determination in the online sphere.
Where your rules, your culture, and ultimately your definition of free expression can truly prevail because you own the place.
And what's truly fascinating here, technically and conceptually, is that one of Web 4's most transformative concepts is federation.
Okay, federation. Like in Star Trek? Or how does that work here?
Maybe a little less dramatic. But the core idea is powerful. It means that people from different independent, federated platforms or servers can seamlessly share content, interact with each other, follow each other, enjoy posts, regardless of which specific platform or instance they happen to be on.
So my server run with Linkspreed could talk to your server run with Linkspreed, or maybe even other compatible software.
Exactly. Think of it like email. You don't need a Gmail account to send a message to someone who has one, right? All the different email services basically speak the same language protocols like SMTP.
Right, it just works.
Or, to use the political analogy from the source again, it's like the free movement laws governing a majority of the European continent. People can travel and interact freely across borders without needing special permission for each interaction. The individual instances, the servers, they remain independent, self-governed. But they are connected through common protocols, creating this vast, interconnected social fabric without needing a central controlling company like Facebook or Twitter.
And this architecture, this federation idea, it naturally pushes us towards these amazing community-driven distributed networks.
Breaking down the silos.
Exactly. Instead of one giant monolithic company like Meta, which governments can lean on or commercial interests can hijack, Web 4 imagines this whole web of independent communities. Think of them as smaller, often specialized instances or servers, all run perhaps by volunteers or groups or individuals who share common beliefs or interests, hosting their own communities.
Which inherently avoids those single points of failure, right?
Precisely. It avoids the single points of failure and the concentrated censorship risks that are so prevalent in the current mainstream platforms. No single entity can ban or shadow ban an entire network spanning thousands of users, when the network itself is actually a resilient web of independent, interconnected communities, each governing its own local space according to its own rules.
And this raises the important question. How does this decentralized, federated model ultimately benefit free speech in practice? Well, it aligns perfectly with what community experts call influence-based communities or movements. These are groups where members collaborate together to achieve something, to improve something that they couldn't do alone.
Like advocacy groups or open source projects or support networks.
Exactly, those kinds of things. These communities are often inherently self-sustaining, they're inclusive to those who share the goal, and they're self-perpetuating, which makes them ideal environments for truly free and vibrant expression to flourish, without that top-down control, without those external commercial or political pressures dictating the conversation.
It's about collective action, shared ownership, fostering an environment where ideas can truly compete and evolve based on their merit within that community. So let's bring it home. By allowing you to build your own social network with Linkspreed's Web4 Lite, you gain complete, essentially unparalleled control over your digital environment.
The ultimate ownership.
Yes. You get to set the rules, you define how they're enforced, you actively shape your community's unique culture. This really is positioned as the ultimate free speech solution because it places the power, the control, the decision-making directly in your hands or the hands of your chosen community moderators, not in the hands of distant, unaccountable corporations or potentially coercive governments.
It's about genuine empowerment, taking back control of our digital social lives. And this raises a crucial point for society. This approach directly counters pretty much all the problems we spent the first half discussing regarding mainstream platforms.
Let's list them off.
Okay. There's no manipulative algorithm distorting your feed to maximize engagement over your well-being. There's no government jawboning, successfully coercing content decisions because there's no single central entity with billions of users to pressure.
Right. Who do they call?
Exactly. And there's no profit-driven enshittification dictating what you see or say, because the motive is community and connection, not ad revenue.
Check.
It's about designing your platform with privacy and trust as core criteria right from the outset, allowing users, for instance, to clearly label their profile details as private, protected, or public, and fundamentally ensuring that user data remains truly in user control on your own server.
So it's building a digital space where free speech isn't just tolerated when convenient,
but structurally guaranteed by the architecture itself, right, the ownership model.
And being free from all that commercial clutter, those divisive algorithms, those hidden external pressures that plague mainstream platforms. These self-hosted Web4 networks, powered by things like Linkspreed, can foster genuine community, real, authentic connection.
Getting back to what social networking was perhaps supposed to be about.
Maybe so. They allow for the rich, multifaceted human expression, the nuance, the debate, the support, the creativity that the current internet often struggles to provide, enabling truly meaningful and unhindered communication within the bounds set by the community itself.
Ultimately, I think the argument is this. For free speech to truly thrive in the digital age, it must be protected not just by laws, which we've seen can be inconsistent, easily circumvented, or even used against speech, but by the very architecture, the very design of the digital spaces we choose to inhabit.
Building freedom into the foundations.
Exactly. By empowering individuals and groups to own and control their own social networks. Linkspreed's Web4 approach offers a practical, powerful path towards genuine digital autonomy, and towards a more resilient, diverse, community-driven internet that might finally live up to that original promise of open expression for everyone. Hashtag outro.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground today. We've journeyed through the really intricate complexities of free speech on mainstream social media, from the legal battles over platform moderation and Section 230, to the subtle, sometimes invisible pressures of government jawboning.
And those ever-present algorithms shaping what we see.
Right, the pervasive influence of algorithmic controls and the gradual worrying erosion of civil discourse that seems to result. We've seen how that relentless profit motive, coupled with a pervasive lack of transparency, can fundamentally undermine the very idea of open, unfettered expression online, often directly to your detriment as a user.
It's a challenging landscape out there.
It is. But importantly, we've also explored a powerful alternative, a different path emerging with Web4 technology.
And what's truly profound here, I believe, is that Linkspreed's Web4 social networks as a service, and particularly its open source Web4 Lite offering. This isn't just presented as a technical solution, another piece of software. It feels like a profound philosophical shift.
A different way of thinking about online space.
Exactly. It puts the power of community building, the power of defining and protecting free expression, squarely back into the hands of individuals and groups. It offers complete control over your digital home. It embraces the power of federation for seamless connection between communities. And it provides a space designed for authentic interaction, for genuine belonging, not just for passive content consumption driven by opaque algorithms and corporate profit motives.
So, what does all this mean for you, listening right now? In a world where free expression feels increasingly contested, where our digital town squares are often controlled by these distant, unaccountable, monolithic entities, could building your own digital home, your own social network, using something like Linkspreed Web4 Lite be the ultimate act? The ultimate act of reclaiming democratic discourse, reclaiming personal autonomy online?
It's a powerful thought.
What kind of community would you choose to build? And what rules, what culture would govern your space for expression?
And perhaps this raises one final important question for all of us to ponder. Is true freedom of speech, in the end, not just about what you are allowed to say, but fundamentally about where you choose to say it and who truly owns and controls that space where your voice resides?
Food for thought. Thanks for that deep dive.
My pleasure. Fascinating topic.